Welcome to this episode of the 1600 Sessions. Revealing the official portraits of presidents and first ladies is a grand and significant White House tradition, and it's a career achievement for the artists selected for these important commissions. The artist identities are, of course, held closely confidential until the unveilings. Today I'm fortunate to talk with both remarkable painters, Robert McCurdy and Sharon Sprung, to hear about that moment when they learned of their historical assignments, their approach to the portraits, and their reflections on capturing President and Mrs. Obama through their unique and special artistic lens. What do Nelson Mandela, Jeff Bezos, and Jane Goodall all have in common? Each has been painted by Robert McCurdy. And now this prominent American painter will add another famous subject to his portfolio, President Barack Obama. As you will see, Robert McCurdy's portraits are like no other. In fact, you may have a hard time believing that they are paintings at all. These large-scale portraits are so exquisitely detailed that they may appear to the viewer as photographs. And they are unusually sparse. There's no props in the background, no Capitol dome, no resolute desk, just the subject. As the artist himself says, in this moment and nothing more. The portraits of the presidents of the United States that hang in the White House are an established tradition going back to George Washington. Robert McCurdy's has just been installed at the White House, and his work joins the portraits of all of our past leaders. This is quite an accomplishment for any artist, and especially for one with such a distinctive, non-traditional style. So, Robert, did you ever dream you would paint the portrait of a president of the United States?
Well, actually, we've done a number of people, and Mr. Obama, President Obama, was on the list we would have invited anyways. So when this project came up, it was just perfect because it saved us the trouble of having to ask him.
How did you first become interested in painting portraits?
Any artist reacts to the period where they enter the art world. And I come in sort of the height of minimalism, the height of the conceptual movements. And those are still enormously appealing to me. The problem with those forms for me was there was sort of an arbitrariness to it. So why does this piece look the way it does? And while I thrashed around with that for quite a while, ultimately, I thought of this idea of painting a person as being absolutely essential.
You mentioned others that you have painted in many portraits. Who are some of your favorites?
This sort of goes back to the whole thing about the paintings, is that it really doesn't matter who sits for it because the subject of the painting is the viewer, not the subject, not the person who sat for the painting, but the thing that happens in between the sitter and the viewer. But having said that, the Dalai Lama was probably the most fun as a sitting experience. Toni Morrison was absolutely fabulous. Gabriel Garcia Marquez we did in Mexico. Nelson Mandela we did in Johannesburg. Warren Buffett was fun. They're all just fabulous people.
Well, to most of us, it would be daunting just to meet these people, but it must be inspiring to you to have the privilege to work with them, to paint them, to get to know them personally. Is that the way it was with President Obama?
Oh yeah, he was charming, as you can imagine. A clear connection, a clear connection of intelligence. He was very present and easy to work with. We had everything we needed to get it done. He worked with us beautifully.
So, Robert, you go in and you're with President Obama and you're going to take the photographs that will eventually result in this magnificent portrait. What do you tell him? Do you give him instructions? Do you give him guidance? How does that work?
This is the speech that everybody gets when they sit for me. So to look directly into the lens, to not smile, not gesture, and just hold into that moment, again, where we're trying to extend time rather than slice it like a photograph. We're not looking for a gestural moment. We're looking for a more meditative or transcendent moment. Um, so that's what we do. They need to look into the lens, not gesture, not move, not smile. It's a very simple process. The setup is quite elaborate. There's a lot of lights and a lot of. We fly an 8x8 butterfly in front of the light. So when you walk in, it's a pretty big set. And then we make a mark on the ground, and as long as your toes are on the mark, we've got you in focus. So they need to hold their mark, look into the lens, not gesture or move.
And did he do a good job at that?
He did an excellent job of that.
That's great. I would imagine he would. This amazing portrait of President Obama will now hang in what is perhaps the most important portrait gallery in our country, and that's the White House. When you see it hanging there for the first time, what do you expect to feel?
I'm pleased that so many people will be able to see it and to sort of set up this connection between the viewer and the subject.
And it will be hanging among portraits from George Washington to George W. Bush. How do you think about your painting in regards to those others? And are there some of those that appeal to you more than others?
I don't think of my paintings as portraits. I think of them as paintings with people in them. And so I don't associate them with the idea of portrait. But having said that, some of the portraits of past presidents I've just love. So the early paintings of Washington, the Rembrandt Peale painting of Thomas Jefferson, they all share this very stripped down quality that I shoot for in my work as well.
Clearly, your style is much different than perhaps Gilbert Stuart's was of George Washington, but perhaps his was thought to be different at the time as well. What do you think it will look and feel like in that very traditional setting of the White House? And do you think that this is something that will need to be explained to people, or that people will embrace it readily?
They do look different, but I also don't think that it needs to be explained to people. I think people seem to get it. The whole idea is to set up. Paintings are stripped down for a reason. They have plain white backgrounds. Nobody gestures. Nobody. There are no props, because we're not here to tell the story of the person that's sitting for them. We're here to create an encounter between the viewer and the sitter. The viewer will bring their emotional and historical package to that moment, and it'll be different for every single one. So people seem to like jump right into that. It happens pretty naturally.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I think looking at it, you connect immediately with the person, the personality of the image of that man, Barack Obama. And I imagine these others who've been painted spend quite a bit of time deciding what chairs in the background and what objects interpret who they are. But with this, it's the man, and he himself interprets who he is. And I think it's really striking about your painting. And I think it will be a wonderful addition to those in the White House. In talking about the process with President Obama, what is it that he liked about the way that you paint?
I don't want to speak for President Obama. If I had to guess, he had seen other work that I'd done. I think the Toni Morrison piece jumps to mind. And I think that directness really appealed to him, because we talked about the process. It is part of my process that the sitter doesn't get to say anything about how the painting looks. They're completely outside the process. Everything that they're going to bring to the table, they bring in the sitting. So he was open to that and accepting of that process. So he never saw the images that we worked from. He never saw the piece in process. It's just, this is the way it's going to be, and he accepted that, and I appreciate that.
Normally, how long does a project like this take from the time you meet the person you're painting and begin that process until it's revealed? I know circumstances may impact that, but in a normal process, how long does it take you to do a portrait?
About 12 to 18 months. I work on one piece at a time. And there are no peripheral projects. That's all I do for 12 to 18 months.
And when it's done, how do you know when it's done?
When it stops irritating me.
That's great. So, Robert, we have amazing presidents and first ladies, all very different personalities, looks, times of history. Looking back at them over time, is there a former president or first lady that you would really enjoy painting?
Oh, well, Jackie Kennedy would have been wonderful to meet her. Franklin Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt. There are some lovely people who've been in the White House.
So there's several that, I think about it'd be great to have dinner with this person and learn what they're really like. But to spend that amount of time that you do to paint them is really extraordinary. And so I'm sure you feel like you would, like with President Obama, even though you didn't spend a year and a half physically with him, you were engaged with him and focused on him as your life's work for that amount of time is pretty incredible.
Yeah, they become, after a year and a half, it becomes more of an object in a way, like a technical issue. I don't feel like I'm really getting to know them as I work with them on the canvas. But those moments when we're doing the sitting, chatting before, they're all really special.
Do you title your portraits? Like if you were to give this one a title, what would you call it?
Again, because the person who is sitting for the painting is never properly the subject. They're all untitled. But because we've done a lot of these, I'll then add the name of the person as inventory control, because once you have 12 untitled paintings, it gets really confusing. Um, so all of the work is untitled and then the name of the person.
Is there always something that is difficult to capture about each person you're painting? The hands, the eyes, the mouth? Is there usually some one thing that you wrestle with more than another?
No, the thing that is difficult. So when we do the sitting and we're actually making the photographs that I'm going to work from, what we're looking for is a moment where there's no time. So there's no before, no after, as if that moment would be the same across a long, like a bell ringing. It just continues to ring, um, and it's it's a way of locking the viewer into the moment. We don't want them to feel like we've sliced time, but that it's kind of an enduring thing. So finding that moment, and frankly, every time that we have a sitting, I always talk to the person who's sitting for me about this. That we're looking for a moment with no time, which is why people don't smile, they don't gesture. We don't want a before or an after. We want those to be continuous. It's sort of, there's a thing in film called a centrifugal decay where a moment is extended beyond its expected duration. You see it in films every once in a while, and it's quite common. And that's kind of what we're doing. We're trying to extend this thing to hold. It's like a hook, try to hold the viewer in the moment. To let there's this idea of transference. So it's sort of like with a shrink, where you tell as little as possible. The shrink will tell you as little as possible about themselves so that you can project onto them. And we're doing the same thing with these paintings. We're telling as little about the sitter as possible so that the viewer can project onto them.
And so when you go in to do the photographs, are you taking the photographs yourself?
Hmm.
And they're black and white, color, both?
We used to shoot large format color. The sitting with President Obama was in digital. It was we've just started shooting digital because it's finally kind of caught up. So they're very, very, very large files.
And how many images would you take in the photograph session?
Typically 100.
And how long will it take you to sort the one that you want? Or do you just go through them and immediately say, that's the one?
Yeah, it's pretty much immediately there's like 3 or 4, and then you just hone it down. But one jumps out.
And I understand you save that one, you work from that one, and all the others go away. Is that right?
Yeah, everything associated with the photograph is destroyed. So any prints, any negatives, anything. I actually did was sitting with Carlos Fuentes at one point and told him this story, that when I was done with these images, I was going to destroy them. And he was so appalled by the idea that I would cut up negatives that he said he was going to make me a villain in one of his short stories.
That's great. That's really great. And so from the time of the deciding on the picture, the photograph, that is all you work with. You don't have another sitting. The president doesn't stand there while you paint. You work exclusively from that photographic image. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. A great deal of the way we see each other, see in images, is based around photography. So I wanted that to be a component in how we did this.
And I've heard it said about your work that, and you can see it clearly in all of the portraits you've painted, they're the perfect realism of, it's almost like a photograph itself. Which is an extraordinary talent and a gift. How do you achieve that other than just a God-given ability?
It's more just doggedness. You just hang in there and work, refine, work it down until you get to that place. But these things are painted this way for a reason. The less that I show my hand in the process, the easier it is for the viewer to get into the moment. So once I start interpreting the painting by like gestures or brushstrokes or inflecting it with my hand, I start telling the viewer how to think about what's happening. And since we're trying to minimize that, to make it as easy as possible for the viewer to jump into this moment, it's important that that period or that process of refining the image is kind of the mechanism that helps the viewer into the moment.
And when considering the portrait, do you consider where it will be hung, where it will be displayed, or do you think of it just in a totally standalone way?
There are things that we can control and things that we can't control. So in terms of the work itself, it's strictly a standalone thing. I don't design them to go into specific places because there's no way of knowing where they're going to end up, except for this piece. We know precisely where this piece is going. But the others are in museums, different places. So you have no control over that. What we can control is how the painting works as an object.
During this process, obviously there was a confidentiality agreement. It was a very secret process. Is that normal for you to work under those perhaps restraints, or was that difficult to keep this a secret that you were doing this, painting a president of the United States?
It wouldn't have been a secret or a problem if it had not gone on for so long. None of these things happen in a vacuum. Some people knew because they had to know. There's the people who helped print the photographs, the people who photographed the piece before it was sent to Washington, people who happened to walk into my studio while we were in this 1.5 year long process. So we had to tie them down as well. So yes, it was a bit of a problem. It's not that big a problem because I don't work with assistants, and there's not a ton of people who come in and out of my studio in the course of this time that I can't explain the situation to and tell them they can't reveal this either. But that was definitely new.
Well, thank you for your patience with that. We have no control over how these things work, and it's exciting for us to work with the artist in preparing these reveals for the people of our country, this work that will hang in the White House perpetually. And we're very excited about the occasion to reveal this portrait that you have done of President Obama. In fact, Robert, you are now part of White House history. And students and others who study the White House and its presidents, it's your image of President Obama that will be the primary image that will represent him to the history books for the White House Historical Association. So thank you so much for your significant history that you have created and that you've now become a part of.
Well, thank you. It's been a great pleasure working with the White House Historical Association on this, and I can't wait to see it in the White House.
Our first ladies throughout history have represented so much about our country, and each has been as different as our presidents. Capturing each one in the official portrait for the White House is a very special responsibility that carries the weight of history, hopes, and tastes. Sharon Sprung, an established New York artist and a leader in the figurative art scene, was up to the formidable challenge of capturing Mrs. Obama for her official White House portrait. So Sharon, tell us about your career. How did you become interested in art and particularly in painting portraits?
Well, I have had a long career at this point. I guess I basically started working full-time as an artist when I was 19. Um, I had gone to college and I went to Cornell and I realized I really wasn't going to get an art education in the way I wanted there because there were a lot of distractions, basically different classes. And I wanted to be in the studio all the time. So after finishing a year, I sought after different people who would help shape the course of what I would do next to study art. And actually, one of the people I spoke to, I wrote 2 letters to Aaron Schickler.
Oh, really? That's fascinating.
So he finally answered, and I went over to his house and I started peppering him with questions, and he was somewhat helpful. But the most interesting thing I found that he said to me was, at this point, I know how all my paintings are going to turn out. You have that mystery to find out.
And for our podcast followers, Aaron Schickler, of course, did the iconic portraits of First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, Nancy Reagan, and then also the portrait of President Kennedy.
Right. He was a great painter. And we later became more like peers. So we had a relationship, an acquaintance over the years. So I learned a few things from him. He told me a few things. He asked me to model for him, which I didn't do. And I also learned that portrait artists have bars in their studios, which I hadn't anticipated, but he had this beautiful studio, and I was very impressed with this full bar.
And so at that time, did you have any idea or even a dream that you might one day paint the portrait of an American First Lady?
Not then. Later on, as I became more accomplished, it's something I wanted to do. I started out really not painting portraits. I started out painting my own paintings, which were always figurative, and they involved portraits of women or men and people doing things in scenes, a little more narrative than portraiture. And as that time passed and I got better, people would ask me to do their portrait rather than buy a painting of a different subject. So that's how it started. And that was a great way to start, because then I knew that people wanted what I did, not what I could do. They were looking at my past work, which was my work. And I think it also gave me a wider perspective about portraiture, that you can add different things to it. It made me think outside the box much more. So it's incredibly helpful to start that way, and then it just snowballing, hopefully.
And so who are some of the people that you have painted, done portraits of?
I'm working on Patsy Mink right now for Congress. Of course, she was the first Asian American and the first woman of color elected to Congress. And she's from Hawaii. And the great thing about that is I got to meet her daughter, which gave me a sense of who she is. So I drilled her for a while. And then before that, I had done a portrait of Jeannette Rankin, also for Congress. And that was great because actually there was nobody alive that really remembered her, or so I thought. So I just sort of called on the powers above, because there weren't great photographs. This is 1917. And asked them to connect me with Jeannette. So when the painting was unveiled, her nephew actually was there. And he started crying that really looked like his aunt. So these things are incredibly meaningful because they come with a history that I'm not involved with. I just read, and then I go shopping and look for an outfit for them. And read about their whole past, their interactions, who they dated, what they did in their lives. So it gives me a great perspective.
Well, tell me what you thought and felt when you received word about doing the portrait of Mrs. Obama.
Well, I was joyous, obviously just joyous.
Was it inspirational joy, or was there a little bit of daunting feeling as well?
No, I just kept saying, I want to do this. I hope this works out. I really want to do this. I'm good for this. And I had told my friends that I had wanted to paint Michelle a while ago.
So tell us about that moment when you met Mrs. Obama and began the conversation with her about painting her portrait.
Well, that didn't quite go as planned. First, I was waiting for them. They were with another artist, the Obamas. And at the last minute, President Obama said that, well, why can't a woman paint him? So then I became there for both of them. And then I had pulled out a piece of paper from a newspaper a few weeks ago and stuck it in my pocketbook of a nice photo I saw of him. So I sort of uncrinkled that from my purse and held it up and said, I really like this photo of you. So the timing, it was both of them. So I was in the Oval Office. I was reading Gone Girl while I was waiting to keep me occupied so I wasn't so nervous. And I kept going with that. And then he walked me, President Obama very graciously walked me into the Oval Office. And this is through my eyes. This has nothing to do with their eyes. I have no idea what they were thinking. But I thought I was in a comedy sketch because they were both sitting in these really high back chairs. And there were 3 people sitting on a couch. And I went to sit on this couch, and I'm much shorter than either of the Obamas. And I just kept sinking into this couch thinking, oh, this is not good. I hope they can see me. So that was the first thing that sort of like, oh no. And then I had worked on talking points because I figure that's what presidents do. They have talking points when they want to get things across. So I handed it out to everybody in the room, and President Obama just sort of flicked it away. And well, no, I said, that's good in a way, because that means he wants me to talk. He doesn't want me to just do what I think I should do. But I did tell him that I would need to refer to it if I got lost. And it was an interesting conversation. I had done some preliminary drawings of Michelle for it, and he picked a couple that he liked, and she picked a couple that she liked, which were very different in mood. And I found that really fascinating, but it gave me a sense of both of them, what they picked. And we talked, it was very collegial and very easy to talk with both of them. And then Thelma Gold was in the room. She was helping with the portrait selection. So during all this, she looked at me and said, why do you paint, Sharon? And then at that point, I just went still, and I had to gasp for air a little bit. You know, when you're about to reveal something you don't know if you really want to reveal to the public. So tears started mounting in my eyes. So I started crying. So who knows what put the interview over the top, but that's how it went. And then, of course, I had a pose with them, and I felt like a munchkin. And then President Obama walked me out of the office, and he held my hand. And I'm like thinking any moment he's going to go, let go of me. But he was very kind and generous. They both were.
Well, clearly you established a wonderful rapport, and that they could see and feel the passion that you have for your work. And I can feel it here as we're talking today. And very soon, this wonderful portrait of Mrs. Obama will take its place in perhaps the most important portrait gallery in our country, and that's the White House. And it will be there among all of these other portraits of presidents and first ladies. And it's going to be quite different by comparison. Tell me what you think. What do you think the reaction will be when people see this beautiful portrait of Mrs. Obama, and not in the very traditional way that we see all of our other first ladies?
That's interesting. I think it is very traditional in some key ways. That, it's a portrait of her. It's a portrait I had them move furniture from the red room to the blue room because the light was better. So that caused a bit of a disturbance at the White House.
Not many people come in and rearrange the furniture there, I can tell you.
Well, they didn't let me touch it. That was a whole big thing. And I was going to try to mix skin colors, but thankfully I thought, no, I don't think I should bring any paint into the White House. I didn't want to leave my mark. But I think the thing that differentiates it more than anything is that it has a modern feel to it because I'm a modern painter. So I consider what I do contemporary realism. And the colors in this, I think, are very different and very rich. And that's different. And I think it's also the intimacy that I got with her.
Tell us about that. Did she actually sit for this portrait, and what were those interactions like?
The first time I was going to photograph her and talk with her, I asked her what her thinking was. What did she want? And she said, I have been so busy. I don't even know. But see, that was really good, even though that was a little daunting, as you would say. It was good because I felt this trust come from her that you do your thing, I do my thing. I'm going to trust you with your thing. And I think portraiture works better sometimes like that. That she didn't contribute that much other than present herself.
And are you having a conversation with her while you're painting, or are you just focused on what you're doing and she's sitting there quietly?
Oh, no, we're both talkies. So, no, we talked, and her dogs were in the yard barking. So we compared our love for dogs. And no, she's very personable and charming and easy to talk with.
And was the pose that you ended up doing, was that something that you suggested to her, or did she have any ideas about that?
No, it's something that I suggested. I was going to do her standing to give it a certain dignity, but she doesn't need dignity. She has so much dignity that I decided to do it sitting just because it was too much looking up at her. I'm that much shorter than her, and I wanted to be at her level or a little below. So we did a seated one, and we played with I took a lot of photos, and we played with different poses. And then her designer came over, maybe not her designer, maybe it's called her stylist, came over and rearranged the dress in a really becoming way that it just clicked. So, it's sometimes collaborative and sometimes you just go with what is. You got to sort of read the moment.
And then did you complete the portrait in your studio, and how did you know when it was done?
Well, actually, I worked on it for 8 months. So it was the longest I've ever worked on one painting. And I worked on it day and night. And I said good morning to her, and I said good night to her. And I had swatches of everything, all the materials that I was painting. And I knew it was done when she started to breathe. That's my goal with portrait painting, is when the person starts to be alive to me and I can interact with them, then I know I'm close.
Mm-hmm. And once it was done, what words would you use to describe the painting? Or if you were to title this painting, what would you title it?
Well, that's I don't title paintings because I can never think globally about them until like a few years later is understand the psychology that went into that. At the moment, I can't really say what I would have titled it. I felt that I had a piece of her, and I saw that in her portrait. She has beautiful hands, beautiful face. She's very dignified and reserved, and I think I captured that.
How does it feel to know that you yourself will now be a part of White House history like Gilbert Stuart or Aaron Schickler?
Yay!
That's pretty incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
And so of all the images and photographs that exist of Mrs. Obama, this will be her official White House portrait. So for the official purposes of the White House, this represents her to history, and you will forever be attached to that painting, that image, and the important place where it hangs in the White House. That's a pretty cool thing.
It's a pretty cool thing.
So if you could go back with any former president and first lady, historically speaking, who would you be interested in painting and why, president or first lady? That's a tough
Well,
question.
I'm sort of, yeah, it's a very tough because there are quite a few of them. I would have liked to have painted Jacqueline and John Kennedy. I love what Schickler did with them. I thought it was so, especially his, I thought it was so in the moment. And both of them just strike me. And as well as Nancy Reagan, he did her. So I really would have liked. I mean, not to step in his footsteps, but that was a great challenge because it was a great time in our history. And for me, his death marked the end of my childhood. I was playing with dolls that day, and then the news came, and that was it. That was the end of my childhood. So, and that's, I think, as things formed for me, that's when the art of portraiture became more and more present in my mind.
And that's such a powerful portrait, of course, painted after his death, and his eyes are downcast. You don't see his eyes. It's a very serious, emotional portrait. And I think the same for Mrs. Kennedy's. And I think it's so interesting with what Schickler did with Nancy Reagan and Jackie Kennedy. They're very similar silhouettes in those long, tall gowns, narrow gowns that they're wearing. And you really get a sense of similarity in the two.
Yeah, they're just breathtaking when you see them in person in the White House. And of course, I love the sergeant that's there of Teddy Roosevelt. Yes. And so I would have liked to paint Teddy Roosevelt too.
Oh, that's cool. I bet he would have been a character. He'd probably been very difficult to get to sit still to paint a portrait.
Sargent, from what I read, he couldn't get him to sit still and he couldn't get him in a good pose. And the pose that he struck was when he was walking down the stairs and holding onto the railing. That's how he got that pose.
What was the most difficult thing to paint of Mrs. Obama?
Her dress.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it wasn't like her expression or her eyes or
Oh,
her hands?
that
It was...
you always go back and forth. When you're in a face, you're prepared for moving things a 16th of an inch. I mean, you just keep moving things around and at first you get an expression, then you change that expression. It's very little strokes. That's why it took 8 months, but that's the grit of it and that's the fun of it. But the dress, it was hard. The color was so beautiful and I really wanted to get the strength of the color and the light. So that was a little harder for me.
And I know this was a challenging process in that we had a rigid confidentiality agreement, and things have taken a long time to get from the point where you began the portrait until now and the reveal. Was it really hard keeping this a secret given your excitement for it?
Yes. It was really, and I had to turn it to the wall anytime anybody came to my studio. And also I think artists direct their own careers. We're self-motivated. So to be under somebody else's rules, quite frankly, was hard for an artist. We live by our own rules and our own strengths and course.
Well, you've been wonderful to work with, and I'm so excited that we now have this reveal, and of course with President Obama's portrait. And I think both of them are quite different than any other portraits that have hung in the White House before. And it makes me wonder if there may have been times when other portraits were hung that they were different for their time or were not as traditional as something that had gone before them. And I think it's good. Times do change. And I think it's wonderful to also reflect the personality and the interest in the style of the subject you're painting. And I really think that's what you've captured here with Mrs. Obama.
Well, thank you. That's very kind.
Great. Well, one of the things that I think most people don't know in our country is this is part of the role and mission of the White House Historical Association. We were created by Mrs. Kennedy to be the private partner to the White House, and we fund things like the rugs, draperies, decorative arts, fine arts, things that perhaps the government couldn't or shouldn't pay for in the White House. And can you imagine, Sharon, if we had to leave it up to Congress to select an artist for a painting, everyone would want that artist from their district or from their state. So the way that we are able to do it is it's left to the President and the First Lady to select the artists that they want and that they are happiest with. And then we have the privilege of are making the arrangements with that artist and bringing it to a point of completion. And then we deliver it together to the American people. And there it hangs in the White House and becomes a part of history.
Amazing.
Well, Sharon, thank you for your contribution to White House history and American history. And this is a special moment for you and for us as well. And congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and be part of this.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the 1600 Sessions. Having the opportunity to meet these remarkable artists and learn about their work for the White House really holds a special place with me, and I hope you have enjoyed this encounter as well. I hope one day you'll have the opportunity to visit the White House and see these historic portraits of President and Mrs. Obama as they were painted by Robert McCurdy and Sharon Sprung. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the 1600 Sessions.